It's hard to believe it's been a full 100 days since I began my journey. No, my mission into the beating heart of the SCP Foundation. I, Stathis Stern, risked detection, my safety, and even my own life for this cause. And I'm sure that makes you wonder why on earth I'd be foolhardy enough to put so much on the line. Well, my reason is the best. No, the only reason that matters. For the sake of art. I decided early on that recording my findings was essential, both for posterity and so that the art world may know just how dedicated I've been in my pursuit of true inspiration. It all started over 3 months ago. That was when I first managed to embed myself in the SCP Foundation. Naturally, I never would have jumped at the idea of having to fraternize with the likes of the Chaos Insurgency. Their methods are far too brutal, their organization seeped in violence that trivializes my own pursuit of a deeper meaning. But even I have to admit, the Insurgency's methodology can yield results. They arrange for a convenient accident to befall a lower-level researcher after they returned home from Site-19, the SCP Foundation's largest and most infamous facility, home to many of their equally infamous anomalies. Thanks to a falsified identity and phony transfer order from the Insurgency, I was able to slip into Site-19 undetected so that I could begin my search. The subterfuge was, at first, easy to maintain. I looked the part, obviously, a lab coat and a name badge, so versatile and yet completely unassuming. I was visible and still imperceptible to the rest of the Foundation's personnel. As far as they knew, I was just the latest transfer to Site-19. As I spent the day getting my bearings, not one of them could have possibly known my true intention. My goal was simple and twofold. First and foremost, I had long felt I deserved to be accepted as a member of the art collective known as AWCY, or Are We Cool Yet? Since the 19th century, they had been championing the creation and exhibition of anomalous artwork, truly pushing the boundaries of what can be considered artistic expression despite the Foundation's attempts to censor AWCY's transcendent art. I had admired their mission statement from afar for a number of years and strived to achieve much the same in my own artwork. However, none of my previous pieces quite met the collective's anomalous pedigree. I know a way to change that, though. Blending in at Site-19 proved to be fairly simple. As long as you stride around with purpose, few will question what you're doing. With my head in a notebook or a look of conviction on my face, I could freely make my way around the facility. But why, you might wonder? What was the actual intention behind my undercover mission? Well, that answer lies in the second half of my goal: recognition. Not just notoriety and acceptance into the ranks of AWCY, but fame throughout the anomalous art world, and all the perks that could come with. Of course, the main hurdle to overcome was that I needed to create a piece of art that was anomalous in its nature. And so, rather than wait for inspiration and materials to fall into my lap, I chose to instead seek out what I needed. The anomalies on offer at Site-19 were abundant, and knowing where to start was tricky. I made the decision, while still getting accustomed to my new surroundings, that I would start wherever I felt the most drawn to. Before the end of my first week in Site-19, I felt the first pull of an anomaly and uncovered it in the most unlikely of places. During my day, most of the SCP Foundation living quarters are empty, meaning I could sneak around there undetected. It was in the personal bathroom of one Foundation doctor that I found SCP-063. To the untrained eye, the anomaly appears to be an ordinary toothbrush, save for the wording stenciled into the pale blue plastic, "The world's best toothbrush." Of course, examining it closer, I learned of its ability to cleave through inorganic matter, like a hot knife through butter. It was quite the shock, slicing the porcelain of the bathroom sink by accident. That would have led to my detection had I not left soon after. But I reflected on the toothbrush, or tothbrush, and what it could possibly represent. Perhaps an acknowledgement of rituals and their importance to human health, yet at the same time, being sharp enough to cut anything not organic, anything not human. Maybe SCP-063 was meant to symbolize the possible dangers of habitual behaviors. The next day I was able to bear witness to an anomalous piece I had only ever heard rumors of. For a time, I thought it to have been the reason for AWCY's founding. After all, its nickname was derived from a particular traditional art form, SCP-173, the sculpture, as those at the Foundation call it. I was able to insert myself into a group of 2 other personnel, a researcher and security officer. The former was entering the container housing SCP-173 to run tests, the latter protecting her. Naturally, I overheard them looking for a third and offered my assistance, even if all I had to do was watch the sculpture intently. I wasn't even allowed to blink without getting someone else to cover for me while I did. I adored it. The messy structure of concrete and rebar defied all notions of what many believed art should be. It wasn't beautiful or pristine. It dared to be ugly, and yet it demanded to be seen, to be looked at and perceived, or else it would break my neck and claim my life. It was everything I'd hoped, pure art personified. It was as I neared the end of my first week in Site-19 that I discovered my next anomalous art piece hidden away in a storage locker. SCP-010, the Collars of Control. These were a collection of cast iron collars that, according to their file, could be used to control the actions and movements of a person wearing one, via a remote control. These collars fascinated me. They were, to my interpretation, tools to control, yet simultaneously a rejection of the very rules that control human beings. Someone wearing an SCP-010 collar could potentially have their entire bodily shape reconfigured by the person wielding the remote. That alone, the fact that these objects could be used to defy the physical laws that dictate the forms we exist in, was a meta-comment rejecting the laws of society in order for free expression. Expression only achieved by art. It all made me appreciate AWCY's dedication to anomalous artworks, yet I was still determined to be welcomed into their collective. My first week hiding within Site-19 concluded with a visit to SCP-107. Held on a pedestal in an otherwise empty room was an empty, hollowed-out turtle shell. Now I, for one, don't respect archaeologists. Art historians are another matter, however. I would rather focus on translating the human experience into my art than waste mental energy on events or objects from hundreds and thousands of years ago. But this turtle shell might be the exception. Apparently, any liquid placed within the shell will be absorbed, only to rain down from the clouds above. There's something quite honest about SCP-107. Interpreted through the mind of an artist such as myself, it appears to be a reminder of the natural world's cyclical process. The liquid within it becomes rain, which falls and feeds the plants. The plant life in turn provides food and shelter for animals, humans too, and so on. On and on the circle of life repeats, as so embodied by the hollow shell of an ancient proud turtle. I began my second week of subterfuge with a scare, a close call that I may have been discovered. One of the Foundation's doctors had complained that his sink had been sliced in two, in spite of my best efforts to cover my tracks. It seemed that using his denture glue to repair the damage SCP-063 had done didn't quite have the effect I had intended. Nevertheless, the reaction by the Foundation seemed to imply that sort of thing happened all the time. An announcement was made reminding all researchers to not toy with the world's best toothbrush, despite how fun it was to slice things up with. Although they requested the culprit come forward, I decided to divert the Foundation's suspicions away from me, hinting to a security officer I had seen Dr. Alto Clef leaving the private bathroom, where I had accidentally broken the sink. They seemed to believe he had been capable of causing the damage. Almost being discovered meant I had to reassess my objective. Over the following few days, I tried to sink into life among the Foundation's researchers, playing the role of a helpful member of personnel so as not to attract any further suspicions. And so I was mostly concerned with the general day-to-day tending to anomalies. Most of them I encountered during this time were living creatures, which were of little interest to me. Although one by the designation of SCP-049, sporting the rather aesthetically striking appearance of a plague doctor, complete with dark robes and a beaked mask. At first I thought him to be quite an amicable, intelligent fellow, that is until I had a moment alone with him, to ask his opinions on art. The plague doctor claimed it was of little importance when compared to curing the pestilence. Naturally, I took that to be a personal insult, requesting to the research head that I be transferred away from an anomaly that was obviously not as intelligent as I first thought. 2.5 weeks had passed, and I had still remained undetected by the Foundation. However, I had been forced to reassess my mission. AWCY were hardly likely to accept me into their group if I had nothing to show for my efforts. I needed either some materials I could use to create an anomalous art piece, or preferably, something I could claim as my own. It wasn't as if the upper echelons of AWCY possessed their own detailed files on every anomaly at Site-19. They would have no idea if something I plucked from containment was an existing SCP, or a Stathis Stern original piece. So I set about finding something I could be my magnum opus, my breakthrough into the anomalous art community. My key to the fame, fortune, and artistic acclaim I so obviously deserved. You may call it plagiarism, using another anomaly as my own piece, but nobody technically owns the objects and entities at Site-19. Even the Foundation themselves are more so jailers and curators than creators. I, however, am a visionary. I just needed something to prove it. My search took me far and wide, all over the width and breadth of Site-19. By the time my first whole month had passed, I had begun to walk the corridors and pass by its containment chambers just like any other researcher, although not one who I had interacted with had any clue they were in the presence of a man who would reshape the anomalous art world. There was an SCP transferred from another facility that I witnessed during that time. According to the Foundation's files, SCP-066 had previously been a ball of braided yarn and ribbon, but had since become an amorphous ball of meat with functioning eyes. What struck me most about SCP-066 was the question it asked since transforming. Are you Eric? At first I thought, I'm not Eric, but the longer I pondered it, I began to wonder, allowing my perception to be challenged. That is what art does, after all. Perhaps much like in the Marshall Mathers sense that we are all Stan, all of us may well be Eric too. I can recall another incident encountering some SCP-131s, creatures known as the iPods, which one almost tripped me up. Their brightly colored teardrop-shaped bodies were certainly striking, a rather abstract modernist biomechanical design, but it was their eyes that I found myself ruminating on. SCP-131 instances had a single, unblinking eye, giving a constant gaze without faltering. I likened it much to the uncritical, unthinking eyes of certain audiences, who in the past had stared at my artwork and had nothing interesting to say about it. In other events, my attempts to avoid detection may have proven a little detrimental. Dr. Clef cornered me, a little perturbed that I had implicated him in the sink slicing incident. He at one point seemed to imply a desire to inflict far worse damage with a ukulele of all things, although I'm sure he was just joking. At least I hope so. The whole interaction reminded me of the urgency of my mission. I still needed my anomalous masterpiece, and would need to have an escape plan in place once I found it. During my next stint of time hidden among the ranks of the Foundation, I tried to broaden my own interpretation of what AWCY would consider to be art. Nothing in their admittedly vaguely defined rules stated my anomalous art piece couldn't be created from a more modern medium. Never mind paintings that can depict a person's death or a sculpture that moves whenever unobserved. What about something like photography? I thought to myself. However, it was around this time that my hopes for such a piece were seemingly answered, in the form of SCP-105, or Iris Thompson, as she introduced herself. Iris had a rather unique relationship with the art of photography. She possessed an ability to alter images taken on a specific Polaroid Express camera from 1982. In the hands of SCP-105, the photographs would come to life, like slices of real-time frozen one moment, then moving the second she held them. She could even alter these images, reaching into the Polaroid to move or retrieve objects. It instilled an idea in me. Perhaps taking a Polaroid of my chosen anomalous art would be enough. That is, until I realized the photographs were only interactable to Iris, and breaking her out of containment was a waste of my skills as an artist. Partway into my third month hiding out in Site-19, part of me began to wonder if the Foundation's security forces were as formidable as I had been led to believe. It seemed I barely even needed to hide my mission to join AWCY, or that I had spent so much time in their facility undetected. It was on my 68th day that I decided to reflect on some of the potential anomalous pieces I had encountered so far. Frustratingly so, I was still yet to discover any that would wipe the smug grins off of the AWCY members, only to replace them with looks of awe. Something in Site-19 would guarantee my spot among the Anomalous Art Collective. I was certain of it. I just had to find it. A potential candidate presented itself, one that might have even allowed me to get back at AWCY for denying my entry for so long. I was shown SCP-3037, a miniature model that depicted the city of Dubrovnik in Croatia. I was watching it and pondering the meaning behind the sculpture, thinking about why it was made to specifically look like Dubrovnik of all places. Maybe, I pondered, it was meant to be a commentary or condemnation of urbanization, given the city's walls keeping its residents contained, confined, much like how we as humans have become trapped by our urban settings, finding comfort in being confined there. However, it was while I was examining SCP-3037 that I apparently suffered something of an incident. From the moment I touched it, I spoke in only Serbo-Croatian, believing myself to actually be the city of Dubrovnik. I awoke a short while later and was informed by another researcher that I had been administered with an extremely high dose of amnestics to negate the effects of SCP-3037. Although later that night I recalled having a dream about some delicious black risotto with squid ink sauce. The research heads ordered security officers to gather everyone in the mess hall. The Foundation was seemingly aware that they had an imposter, a charlatan in their midst, pretending to be a member of personnel. I made sure my facial expression did not betray that I was the one they sought. Not one of these Philistines could appreciate my goal of infiltrating Site-19. Not one had the slightest clue how revolutionary my actions would be for the art world. However, although staying vigilant, I became increasingly aware time might not be on my side much longer. After overhearing a conversation about something known as SCP-035, I began conducting my own secretive research into what it was. I discovered information on the so-called possessive mask within the Foundation's archives. Immediately, my heart skipped a beat. The porcelain mask that shifted from an exaggerated comedic grin to a wide frown, it would have made for a perfect art piece to present to AWCY. Much to my annoyance, SCP-035 wasn't housed at Site-19, however. Over the next few days, I petitioned to have the possessive mask transferred to the facility so that I could claim it. My greatest anomalous art piece stayed out of reach, though. I was informed by senior research staff that the mask posed a potential danger. Anyone nearby was compelled to wear it, and would thus be taken over by its influence. Additionally, questions started to be raised as to why I was requesting this transfer in the first place. I was starting to grow concerned that my cover had been blown. By now it very much seemed that my time was running out. And although it shames me to admit it, to say I handled that notion with grace and professionality, well, that would be a lie. Suddenly, I found it. The perfect anomalous art piece. While rummaging around the Foundation's files, I located one about something known as SCP-1379. As I read more, I realized it would secure my spot within AWCY and forever grant me the recognition I deserved. Even better, it was a painting. Such a classical art medium, they'd never be able to refuse me. As I looked at it directly for the first time, I knew I had found my masterpiece. SCP-1379 depicted a clown and two children on the canvas, but the subject of the painting would hardly matter to AWCY. They only cared that the artwork was anomalous. And SCP-1379 certainly was. This painting would allow me to exact revenge on the AWCY members who'd failed to recognize my artistic genius for so long. Anyone that made a critical remark on SCP-1379, which those AWCY snobs were bound to do when they saw it, would first experience intense pain. After 20 minutes of sharp, severe agony, the sensations would subside, but that would only be the start of it. Everyone at the AWCY that dared to criticize my magnum opus, my SCP-1379, would rapidly lose their ability to imagine. Any of their creativity that allowed them to laud their artistic superiority over me would cease to exist. None of them would ever make anomalous art again, and they'd surely be forced to finally accept that I am, in fact, the greatest artist of all time. From the moment I saw it, I began to plan my escape with SCP-1379 in tow. 100 days have passed since I arrived here, and when I leave it will be with SCP-1379 and this journal. I've not only chronicled how I infiltrated the SCP Foundation, but also cataloged more about anomalous art than anyone at AWCY ever has. Once I've lifted that painting from its containment locker, My old friends at the Insurgency have arranged for me to be extracted from Site-19 with SCP-1379. Finally, I'll achieve my dream of... This journal, belonging to one Stathis Stearns, has been seized by the SCP Foundation. Stearns was discovered to have infiltrated Site-19 after only a handful of days. However, given that he posed little threat and never left the facility, security officers were instructed to monitor him closely until he attempted to escape. Aware of intelligence reports regarding various SCPs noted within his journal, the Foundation deemed Stathis Stearns a security risk after 100 days. Subject was arrested attempting to escape and is to be administered amnestics. His journal will remain at Site-19 until further notice. Now go and check out I Survived 100 Days of SCP-001 When Day Breaks, Here's What Happened, and I Survived 100 Days in SCP-3008 Here's What Happened for more thrilling 100-day survival challenges.